Alright, welcome to the third video for the mission template. This one will cover the script settings. Now, things will look different depending on which template version you're using, but generally speaking, the only file you'll need to be concerned with is config.sqf. Older versions of the template might have you configure options in initserver.sqf, but these days, config.sqf is the only one that you'll be needing. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll be using Visual Studio Code with the SQF plugin installed, but you can really use any editor you want to configure these options. I would just say anything except normal Notepad. I would say that the minimum you should use is Notepad++, which you can get for free and is like 1 minute of setup at most. Anyway, so I'm going to open my config.sqf, and I'm actually just going to open the entire thing as a workspace for easier navigating between files. But anyways, here I am opening config.sqf, and this will include all of our scripts options. I will note that things will look different depending on which version you're looking at, but as of now in version 11, this is all up to date and current. So first of all, I will not be reading all of the comments, so go ahead and pause the video and read more if you want, and I will also not be demonstrating the actual effects of all these scripts in the interest of time. So if you find something interesting, then pause it, enable that system, and play the template and see what's changed. So first off, we just have some general configuring options about options that aren't present here. So first of all, if you're building custom arsenals, then you might want to use the auto faction arsenal script. So to view how to use that, go over here to functions, scripts, auto faction arsenal, and it will teach you how to run it and what it does. Second of all, for you mission makers who might be adding special hold actions for like objectives or activating doors or stuff like that, you should probably add them in this file, functions apply hold actions, instead of init player local or init server, because apply hold actions has special things for automatically making sure that Arma doesn't eat those actions as it sometimes likes to do. If you want to add a custom ACE Fortify preset, then go to description.ext and do it there in this section and follow the instructions there. Then if you're asked to use the automated reviewer system, how you would do that is that you would just play the game and then open up the debug console and execute that code. And then finally, just in general, note that the default settings are good for the vast majority of missions. So when in doubt, just leave an option on the defaults. Now to the actual options. So in this first section, we have the general script/functions options. So first up is the Quicksilver Blue Force Tracker script. So you've probably seen this in game. It marks all the players in all the groups on the map for your side and for any friendly sides, and it also marks down players and people in fire teams with a special color if they're in your squad. All of those settings are configurable. You can go to script/QS icons if you would like to configure those settings. Generally speaking, this is a good one to just leave on the default of true. Next up is the 3D group icon. So at mission start, if you have this enabled, above every group leader, it'll put a giant flag above them with what squad they are for people to be able to easily find their leaders. So that's just a simple true to enable, false to disable. There's also a Zeus module for this with the on/off button for you to disable it once players leave the starting base, because leaving on the giant markers throughout the entire game, it usually gets kind of meh due to how large they are and how they can go through walls. Then also there's also two options for automatically turning off the group icons. The first one, group icons time, you just change it to any number, and that number in seconds time after the mission starts, the group icons will automatically turn off. Then just set to 0 for it to never automatically turn off after time has passed. The second one does the same thing, but instead of seconds after mission start, it checks how far all the players are from the ACE heal object, and once the majority of players have went beyond this distance from the ACE heal object, then it'll turn off the group icons. So by default, it's set to use 150 meters for range and disable the time system, but change that as you want. And remember that you can always use the Zeus module to turn on or turn off the system in game. Next one is just a resupply object. So I already covered this in the Eden tutorial, but again, there's just a object in your mission that players can interact with to spawn a resupply box. It'll automatically be disabled if you delete the objects from the Eden part of the template, but you can also disable it here if you want as well. Just change the true to false. Next part is just a text briefing format thing. So if you prefer to write down briefings in a text file rather than with the resources that the Eden editor gives you, then you can use this. So you would just go to functions fnbriefing.sqf, which is over here, and you would just edit the situation, mission, execution, and administration sections as you wish. And then you would also just turn text briefing to true. But if you don't want to do that, just leave it on false and it won't be created. Next is Arsenal Curate. So this just removes certain problematic items from the arsenals automatically that you might have accidentally enabled. So usually this is like hidden stuff like bright lights and doomsday rounds that you probably accidentally added when you hit add all compatible ammo. The problem is that they're invisible, so you can't see that you added them. But this script will automatically remove it from your arsenals, assuming that your arsenals have the variable names of arsenal_1, arsenal_2, etc. from 1 to 10. And then also in the 2030s mod pack, it also removes the Lago super weapons, since those aren't suitable for most ops. So if you're wondering why you can't put the Lago super weapons inside your arsenals, you probably have this set to true and it's automatically removing those. So you can just set that to false to have them added. Or if you want to customize what gets removed and you know a bit of coding, you can go to init player local and you can go down to the Arsenal Curate section and mess with this. But only do that if you know what you're doing. And then also note for each of these, if you're using a advanced enough text editor, then you can just collapse each of these sections once you've already seen the options for that to save some space and just have a bit better time seeing everything. So up next is the inventory options. So these are various things to help you automatically assign inventory items to your players instead of having to manually make their loadouts. So first of all, just general note, you should only be using Ace arsenals. If you're using other arsenals, I cannot guarantee that most of these scripts will work. So the first one up is the TFAR gear assignment. So this just automatically gives backpack and personal radios to everyone, so you don't need to worry about that. So I would say always leave it on true. And the second option, enable this if you're using RTOs. If you have it enabled, then so the squad leaders getting the radio backpacks and people with the RTO name will get the radio backpacks instead. And the third option, radio additionals, it will make it so the second channel on people's radios will be automatically set as a additional channel on mission start. Note this is for their personal radio, not for their backpack radio. So this is useful if you want people to use fire team net radio nets instead of everyone being on the squad net. But we generally don't do that, so it's defaulted to false. Also note that the radio frequencies are not automatically set by this, it's instead set by their TFAR attributes in Eden. This just gives them the personal and backpack radios. And if you want to change what those personal and backpack radios are, then you can just change the next two items. So the first one is just their radio item in their inventory, and then the second one is the backpack radio class name that leadership gets. So by default, it's a ANPRC 155, which is a Coyote, which is like a tan backpack, so you might want to change it to like a white backpack radio if the players have like snow camouflage. Alright, next section is the loadout from config. So this one's very nice if you're trying to change the players away from their default loadouts of like NATO or whatever. So what this does is it assigns the player loadouts from the config entries of units in that given faction. So this can happen a few different ways. So it looks at their role name. So for example, for the squad leader, it would be squad leader. It'll ignore anything in brackets or after the @ sign. So you would enable the system by setting this by true, and then you would change the TAS config faction, which is the loadout, the faction of stuff to give them. So in this example, I'm going to make our blue 4 guys be CSAT for whatever reason. So first of all, I would place any unit from CSAT. I'd right click, I would do log, and I would do log faction names to clipboard. Then I would go to my options, and I would replace config faction with a copy paste. I would remove those extra quotations, and then that's the faction name of stuff to grab. And now I would look in my CSAT faction. I would say, all right, so my player is a squad leader. Is there anyone named squad leader in my new faction? And if there is, like there was in CSAT, then you're basically done. Like there's a matching loadout, everything is good, the names are the same, so when the mission starts, we will automatically get a CSAT squad leader. But what if you want to change it to something like the Papa John's people, where like there's no squad leaders, there's just Papa John's managers? In that case, you would have to change config loadout custom to true. And then you would go to init player local. You would scroll up, well, you would be at the start of the file, and you would scroll down to this first section called use config loadout. You would pause the video and you would read this, but you would just go down to I'm looking for my regular squad, which is all the way at the end here. So if my player has a role name of squad leader, I want him to get the loadout of the unit in my target faction that is called Papa John's manager. So I would just find squad leader here. I would replace display name of unit in given faction with Papa John's manager. And then when I play the mission, my squad leader would just get the gear with the Papa John's manager. Simple. It's much better than any of the other ways of replacing the inventories. But yeah, there's a couple of different ways to do this. Read the text, but the way I just described is the easiest. Then just for the other options, config unit prefix. This is only used in, like, for example, special forces might be called special forces rifleman, special forces squad leader, where like, so you don't have to type out the special forces every time. You can just put it here, and then it'll automatically add special forces in front of the role name. So our player would be special forces squad leader and would automatically get the loadout of the role called special forces squad leader. The default config loadout is just the loadout it defaults to if it doesn't find, for example, a squad leader. So normally just use the basic rifleman, check your faction, check what the basic loadout is called. For CSAT, it's just rifleman. And then you would just put it here. Config loadout number, leave that in 0, unless you're told otherwise. Alright, next is populate inventories. This is just a simple thing to put items inside each of your players. So read this to see what it gives. It gives a certain amount of medical and ammo and grenades and everything. However, note that it does wipe the current inventory of people. So this is nice for standardizing what people get on mission start. Of course, players can always just go to the arsenals and get their gear that way, but it's nice to just leave this on and to have them get a standard set of items every time. Now, the next is the role-based arsenals. It has a fair amount of configuring. Its main purpose is when you want to make special ace arsenals for every role. So just follow the various steps here for how to configure it, because it is a little bit in-depth process, and since it's not an option used very often, I'm not going to include a tutorial of it in this video right now, but maybe I might in the future. Alright, the next section is the respawn options. So these govern various settings that can affect respawning of players in your mission. And then, of course, these all customize the respawns, but you still need the default vanilla respawn set up and working. So as a reminder, you need the respawn position modules, and then in mission attributes and multiplayer, you need respawn and custom position, any non-zero time, and then select respawn positions, show respawn counter should be ticked. Alright, so our first option determines the gear that players get when they respawn. So there's 3 choices. One is just the vanilla config loadout, which is usually not what you want. How you get that is that you would just set both of these to false. The second option is respawning players with the gear they had when they died. So to have that, you would just set respawn death gear to true. The third one is respawning the players with the gear that they had the last time they were at the arsenal, and this is the preferred one. So change respawn arsenal here to true. Never have both these options set to true at the same time. Always have at least one or even both of them be false. Next is the spectator options. So this is just a general toggle that makes players respawn in a spectator plus some extra things. So the first one, respawn spectator, true to make people respawn in a spectator, false to make them not. Pretty simple. The second one, respawn spectator force interface, change it to true, they won't be able to exit spectator until their timer is up. False to make them able to exit spectator at any time. The third one, respawn spectator hide body. When they're in spectator mode, it hides their body if it's set to true. Pretty simple. The fourth is respawn spectator time. This is the time that puts them into spectator for, and then when the time has elapsed, it automatically gets them out to spectator. So you can set to 0 for infinite time, or if you set it to any other number, then it will just be that time in seconds that they will be in the spectator mode. Again, if you want to force them to be in spectator, then you can set force interface true. Otherwise, if you want them able to exit spectator and mess with the arsenals, then just set respawn spectator force interface to false. The respawn spectator system is especially good when paired with the respawn vehicle or fob systems, because you can just dunk people into spectator mode or allow them to edit their loadouts, and then at the end of their respawn spectator time, then it'll automatically pull up the GUI for them to choose where to respawn at the respawn vehicles or the fobs, whichever you have enabled. But we will get to those in a minute. Before we get to those, we first have to talk about the wave respawn system. So this is pretty simple, just as wave respawns. So this needs to have respawn spectator set to true to work, but then you would just set wave respawn to true to enable, and wave time will override respawn to spectator time. So on its defaults, you can just set to true, and then 300 is 300 seconds, so every 5 minutes it will do a respawn wave. There's some additional information written here. Just go ahead and pause the video and read that. Alright, next is the respawn in vehicle system. So this adds the ability for players to respawn via teleporting into a vehicle once their respawn spectator time is ended. So how you would add this is that if you don't add any respawn vehicles in your mission, then the logistics vehicle, this thing, will get automatically set as the respawn vehicle. Alternatively, you can copy this code, place down any vehicle, paste the code in there, change the name that you want to appear, like fuel truck respawn, and then you just give the vehicle any variable name, like fuel truck respawn. And there, players will just be able to respawn in this vehicle once their spectator time is ended. Of course, you would also need to set that to true. Alternatively, if you want to add more respawn vehicles mid-mission, then you can also use the Zeus module to do so. Next up is the fob system. This has a lot of options. So it's actually two parts. There's the fob system and then the rally point system. So the fob system attaches an option to your logistics vehicle that players can use to set up a fob. So this is a fairly big sized fob. It has a respawn point. It has either full arsenals if you set this true, or if you set it to false, and there'll just be the ammo and medical resupply crates. If fob backup is set to true, then players can disassemble the fob and reassemble it somewhere else, assuming the logistics vehicle is still intact. And then if fob respawn, if it's set to true, then players get a vanilla respawn point there. If it's false, then there will be no vanilla respawn position there, but they can still teleport to that with the respawn GUI that pops up after their respawn spectator time has elapsed. Fob distance. This is a distance that enemies have to not be in from the vehicle for the fob to be set up. So if players try to set up the fob, but there's enemies within 300 meters, then it'll give them an error message, and they'll have to clear the area before they can place the fob. Alright, and then also, if we'll get to the rally points in a minute, but if you want to use the rally points without the fob, then you would just set fob enable to true, but then you would just delete the logistics vehicle from your mission, or just hide it in a corner of the map, whichever. Alright, next up is a subsection of FOB. It's the FOB overrun settings. So this enables the overrun system, which is when a certain number of enemies get within a certain radius of the FOB, then it'll start a overrun process. It'll show a hint to the players. The players will have a certain amount of time to get back to the FOB and defend it, and if they don't defend it, then the FOB will be destroyed. So let's look at those specific options. So TAS FOB overrun, change it to true, and the FOB's overrun system will be enabled. FOB overrun destroy, if you set to true, then when the FOB is overrun, then all the structures will be destroyed, which might cause mild damage to any players hiding in it at the moment. Set to false, and when the FOB is overrun, then the respawn point will be removed, but the actual structures will still be intact and not magically destroyed. The FOB overrun factor controls how many more enemies have to be present than friendlies within TAS FOB distance to begin the overrun. So, for example, for a factor of 2, if there's 2 friendlies within 300 meters, then there has to be at least 4 enemies for the overrun to continue happening. The next one is TAS FOB minimum enemy. If there's less than this number of enemies within TAS FOB distance, then the overrun is cancelled or can't occur in the first place. So this is useful if you want to make a minimum so that players don't have to run back and defend the FOB every time a single rifleman wanders in. The next is TAS FOB overrun timer. So this is how long the players have to get back to the FOB and defend it. And the final one is this TAS FOB overrun interval. This is just how long in between updates of the overrun system. Keep this at 30 seconds or below, and it has to be divisor of the FOB timer. So like 3, 5, 10, 15, 30, just not like 7 or 13 or numbers that don't go evenly into 300. The next settings are the rally points. So just a couple options here. Just a reminder that if you want to have rally points but no FOB, then you can just set FOB enabled to true but delete the logistics vehicle. And if you want to have the FOB without the rally points, then you can just change rally distance to like 999999999. So it'll be impossible to place rally points. But anyways, the other options here, use small rally, default true. What it does is that it just spawns like a campfire to use as a rally point. Set to false, and it will also spawn a small ammo box as well. Second one is TAS rally distance. It's the distance which has to be clear of enemies for the rally to be successfully placed. Just like the FOB, if there's enemies within that distance, then the rally point cannot be placed without it being cancelled. The third one, rally outnumber. So if you change this to true, instead of no enemies having to be present within 150 enemies, it's just that enemies can't outnumber friendlies within that radius for the rally point creation to succeed. Now finally, the rally point overrun settings is basically the same as FOB, just for the rally points. So it's a smaller scale, smaller time, but same generic overrun system as used by the FOB. So it's about the same settings. There's an overall on/off switch. There's an outnumber factor. There's a minimum enemy number. There's an overrun timer, and there's an overrun interval. And again, this distance is just the same as TAS rally distance for the overrun system. And there you have it. Now finally, the advanced options. So generally speaking, you should not be scrolling down beyond this point, because these are all just background systems that don't do too much. They just enhance the gameplay experience by tweaking a few things in the background, like adding a thing that updates your Discord status if you have the compatibility mod for that, or it enables a dynamic group system, or etc. If you really want to, then go down and edit these. There's comments explaining what each of them do, but it's really recommended to leave these on the defaults. Alright, and that is most of the config settings. And then just remember to save the file before you exit. Save and done.